2,000 years ago, somewhere in Gaul, night settles over the hills. The forest breathes with the slow crackle of a great fire. Men sit in a wide circle, their faces caught in the shifting orange glow. Around them, wolves' pelts and the smell of smoke. At the center, a bronze cauldron boils, the surface trembling as stones hiss and sink beneath the water. The air smells of fat, salt, and burning oak. This is not a meal of comfort, it is a ritual of strength and belonging, the food of hunters, warriors, and priests. Here, meat is not just eaten, it is honored. They hunted for glory, but they ate for the gods. The people the Romans called Celts once stretched from the highlands of Anatolia to the wind-swept coasts of Britain. Dozens of tribes, hundreds of voices, yet a single rhythm of life: land, fire, and feast. In Gaul, they farmed valleys rich with barley and wheat. In Iberia, they fished the cold Atlantic. In the north, they hunted deer and boar in endless forests. They wrote little, so what remains comes from outsiders: Greeks, Romans, traders, and soldiers. Writers like Diodorus, Posidonius, and Strabo looked on with awe and suspicion. They described tall men with fair hair hardened by cold, who washed in lime water to turn their hair pale and stiff, and who shouted when they spoke, their voices echoing like iron. But even these strangers saw something sacred in how the Celts lived, that they measured courage not only in battle, but in how they gathered, shared, and fed one another. Their food came from the soil and the chase. The forests of Gaul were full of boar, fierce, dangerous, and holy. To kill one was both risk and offering. They raised pigs, sheep, and cattle, trading salted meat south to Rome, and from that trade came wine, coins, and envy. Barley and wheat filled their fields. Leeks, sorrel, and marjoram colored their stews. Hazelnuts, cracked open for oil and strength. Butter, thick, golden, and rare, was a mark of wealth. Pliny the Elder would later write that in Celtic lands, butter was the food of the rich, not the poor. But their true treasure was salt. It came from the mountains of Holstad, carved from stone 7,000 years before. Salt flavored their food, healed their wounds, and preserved the dead. It was the taste of trade, of life, and of memory. Cooking itself was an act of devotion. Their cauldrons hung from iron chains or rested on stones. Some were simple clay pots, blackened by centuries of fire. Others were made of silver, carved with gods and beasts, like the sacred Gundestrup cauldron found buried in the soil, its surface alive with myth. When the hunt returned, the meat was lowered into the water, sometimes wrapped in grass, sometimes stirred with wooden paddles. If there was no fire beneath, they dropped in red-hot stones until the liquid boiled. Steam rose into the night as the smell of flesh and salt filled the air. They ate sitting on the ground, each man with his own knife, tearing the meat apart with bare hands. The sound was raw and human, tearing, breathing, laughter breaking through smoke. It was not luxury. It was belonging. To share the pot was to share the tribe. But even in the warmth of the circle, rank mattered. The most prized cut of meat, the thigh or shoulder, was the champion's portion. It belonged to the bravest man present. If two claimed it, they fought for it, sometimes with words, sometimes with steel, and sometimes one never rose again. They sat in circles on the ground, over furs of wolves or dogs. The host's seat lay at the center, surrounded by friends and rivals. Young boys and girls served the food on low wooden tables, their movements watched by warriors, measuring every gesture of pride or respect. The feast was both peace and test. A man's worth could rise or fall between one bite and the next. To eat was to prove courage, to serve was to show grace. Yet, the Celts were known for their hospitality. They fed strangers before asking their names. They believed that to offer bread and meat was to honor the gods themselves. But the same fire that warmed their guests could ignite into violence. A single insult could turn a meal into a battle. And when words cooled and weapons rested, the circle turned again, from fire to drink. What they drank revealed as much about them as what they ate. They drank as they lived, in layers of wealth and equality. Wine, imported from Italy, was the mark of the elite. 10,000 amphora lie buried in the ground of Gaul, proof of a trade where one jar of wine could cost a slave. They drank it pure, unwatered, flavored with cumin, a habit the Romans called barbaric. The poor drank what they made: mead from honey, fermented by the air itself, ale from barley, strong and heavy, the smell of earth in every sip. Pliny wrote that the foam from this beer could raise dough, and they used it to bake lighter bread. One small luxury shared by many. During the feast, one cup passed from hand to hand. Each person took a sip and passed it on. A slow circle of trust, where rank dissolved into ritual. It was perhaps their purest form of equality. To outsiders, the Celts seemed wild, but within their own rules they were disciplined. Strabo wrote that young men who grew fat were punished. They despised idleness and prized the lean, controlled body. The feast celebrated strength, not gluttony. To eat without restraint was shameful. To hold back was mastery. This discipline shaped their image: tall, sharp, unyielding. Even their soap, made from ash and fat, was said to have been copied by the Romans. They cared for their bodies not out of vanity, but because the body was proof of will. Around their fires they built more than meals. They built memory, of courage, of tribe, of the bond between earth and spirit. Their food was simple, but never without meaning. The salt that preserved their meat carried the taste of mountains. The butter that melted in their bread marked wealth and time. The ale and mead that passed between hands told stories older than language. In every shared bowl, they renewed their faith, not in gods carved from stone, but in the act of sharing itself. They hunted for glory, but they ate for the gods. And in the crackle of the fire, in the rising smoke and the smell of salt and fat, they left behind a truth older than empire or scripture, that food is not just survival, it is belonging, it is remembrance. And though their voices are gone, the warmth of their feasts still glows, the same glow that once flickered in those hills of Gaul, in the salt, the smoke, and the firelight of every table that came after them.